Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be tier ranking my favorite fantasy romance reads. Alright guys, so for this video I'm going to be rating and reviewing my favorite fantasy romance books. Now I did a video very similar to this, my fantasy romance tier rank, which I'll leave linked in the cards and in the description, but it's been over a year and since then I've just read some amazing fantasy romance books and my opinions have changed on some of the books I rated last year. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Now if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit the notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram and Goodreads, both linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's tier rank these fantasy romance books. Alright guys, welcome to the tier rank. So there are over 30 fantasy romance books on this list. I broke it down into 5 different categories. So first up, we have Perfection. I loved everything about this book. I would highly recommend it to all of my friends, and it has a lot of rereadability. Then we have Great. It was an absolutely amazing read. I still very much enjoyed it. Then we have Okay, so I probably enjoyed this while I was reading it, however, I'm not sure if I would pick it back up. Then we have Not For Me, where I can understand how a lot of people would really enjoy this book, however, there was something about it that I just didn't love. And then we have Nope, which is just, I did not enjoy this book, and yeah. So I'm gonna do a very brief summary for some of the less popular books, and this will be completely spoiler-free. So first up, we have The Zodiac Academy by Peckham and Susanne Valenti. I have an entire review of this series. This is following the Vega twins who on their 18th birthday, they find out they are Fae royalty, but in order to claim their inheritance, they have to go to this Fae Academy. And when they get there, they find out that there are these 4 celestial heirs that are already ruling the school. This is a bully romance that I am obsessed with. Someone on TikTok compared it to watching like trashy TV, which is very true. The writing isn't amazing. It gets better as the series progresses, but there's just so much drama and angst, and I love it. I'm actually gonna put this in Perfection. The first book in the series is probably the weakest in the series. I only include the first book on this list, but I've never had so many emotions from reading a book. I love this series so much. Then we have From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. If you have not read the series and you're a fan of fantasy romance, please pick it up. It is paranormal and it's just so good. We are following the maiden, Poppy, who was raised in isolation. One day she goes out in disguise. She meets Hawk, who's the newest member of the Rise Guard. They hit it off right away. This has slow burn romance, paranormal creatures, angst. It is just so good. And the first one is actually my favorite in the entire series. Next up is A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is the second book in the series. This is actually my least favorite so far in the series. It was still very good. However, I'm not really sure. There were some like spicy moments that felt like they caused some pacing issues. There's a very big battle scene that I actually very much enjoyed, but then something happens in a carriage like while all of it's going on, and I just didn't love it as much. So I'm actually gonna put this one in okay. I did enjoy it. It's just not my favorite in the series. Then we have A Crown of Gilded Bones, which is the third book in the From Blood and Ash series. I really like this. A lot of people said this is the weakest in the series. I disagree. I think there is so much action going on, and the ending, oh my goodness. So that I'm gonna put in great. A War of Two Queens has yet to be released when I'm filming this video. It's gonna come out this coming Tuesday. I am so excited. If you want a recap of any of the From Blood and Ash books, I've recapped all of them. I will leave those linked down in the description below. Next up is A Shadow in the Ember by Jennifer L. Armentrout. So this is a companion series to From Blood and Ash following the first maiden, Sarah and Nyktos. And oh my goodness, I loved this. I'm gonna put this with great as well. There were some editing issues that a lot of people have noticed. I don't think they took away from the story at all, but they can be a little bit annoying. That's the only reason it's not in Perfection, but still very enjoyable read. Definitely read A Shadow in the Ember before you jump into A War of Two Queens. I've heard that you're really gonna have to have info from the From Blood and Ash and Shadow in the Ember series. So next up we have Kingdom of the Wicked, which is YA. This is following a witch who a tragedy takes place in the very beginning of the story, and she is trying to solve a murder, and she ends up teaming up with one of the princes of hell, Wrath, and they hate each other right off the bat, and I very much enjoyed this. I am gonna put this with okay, and the only reason is because Kingdom of the Wicked, or Kingdom of the Cursed, which is actually new adult, so the spice level went up a little bit. The sequel to Kingdom of the Wicked, I enjoyed a little bit more. So in Kingdom of the Cursed, we see Amelia and Wrath travel to the underworld to still trying to solve the thing they were trying to solve in the first book. And the tension is just higher, and I love their chemistry together, and it's a little bit spicier, so I really enjoyed it. Then we have Serpent and Dove, and I just feel so conflicted about this series. So this is a YA series following a witch and a witch hunter, Lou and Reed, and they end up doing this marriage of convenience. It has a lot of the tropes I like the one bed trope, proximity trope, and these two have exact opposite personalities, and I love it. This was fun. I'm going to put this one with okay. Blood and Honey, on the other hand, which is the sequel to Serpent and Dove, I hated. I feel like we lost our characters. They just felt like completely different characters in the second book. They were making decisions that didn't make any sense, and the overall just feel of the book, I feel it felt very different from Serpent and Dove. So Blood and Honey was one of my least favorite books I read, I think in 2021. I really disliked it. And I almost didn't pick up God and Monsters, which is the conclusion, the third book in the Serpent and Dove series. I am so happy I did because I think it concluded the series very, very well. Lou and Reed felt like they kind of came back to where they were in Serpent and Dove, and I think she ended the series very well. So I'm going to put God and Monsters with okay. Blood and Honey, though, that was rough. All right. Next up, we have A Court of Thorns and Roses. I'm sure all of you know what this book is about. It is following our main character, Farah, who lives in these human territories, and one day she kills a fae that was disguised as a wolf, and for payment, she ends up being taken by the High Lord of the Spring Court, as it's like a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and then so much happens as the series progresses. I love this series. It is so, so good. The first book, I love because it introduced the world and the characters to me, but it's not my favorite in the series, so I'm actually going to put it with great, because A Court of Mist and Fury, the second book in the series, was amazing. It is one of my absolute favorite books. If I was stuck on a deserted island and could only bring one book, it would probably be A Court of Mist and Fury. I don't know what that says about me, but I just love the relationship in this book. The inner circle is one of my favorite groupings of characters. It's so good. And then we have A Court of Wings and Ruin. So a lot of people actually were not a fan of this last book. I loved it. The High Lord scene, I think, is one of the best scenes SJM has ever written. And I really like how the series concluded. There is a novella after this, which is A Court of Frost and Starlight. I hated it, and I try to pretend that book doesn't exist. That's why it's not on this list. But A Court of Wings and Ruin is actually going to go up also with perfection. I really love the conclusion of this series. And then we also have, it's not in order. There it is. A Court of Silver Flames, which is Nesta and Cassian's story. You do have to read the original series of ACOTAR before jumping into A Court in Silver Flames. I was very nervous because I hated Nesta as a character. And Cassian, I didn't mind, but Azrael is my favorite Bat Boy, so I wasn't like super jazzed to read a book about Nesta, who I hated, and Cassian. But I think Sarah J. Maas did a really good job redeeming Nesta. By the end of it, like, I understood her a little bit more. So I'm actually going to put this with great. I just had very low expectations, and I ended up really, really enjoying it. All right, so the rest of these books are a little bit less known. Fortuna Sworn, I am currently rereading. I forgot how much I loved this series, so I just reread the first book. Fortuna Sworn is following a nightmare. So she is this woman that has the power to, when she touches someone, she has them see their darkest fears, and she's like the last of her kind. Now, her brother went missing 2 years ago, and she's been struggling to find him. And one day, this mysterious fae shows up on her doorstep and says, "I know where your brother is, but if you want to save him, you have to marry me." And it goes from there. It's super dark. It has a trial element that I completely forgot about but really enjoyed, and it's really, really good. Check trigger warnings, but I very much enjoyed this. I'm going to put this with great. I can't wait to finish the reread of this series. I think I got to book 3 when I stopped, and I think there's 4 books out now. All right, next up we have A Ruin of Roses. So, unfortunately, I was not a huge fan of this. I'm going to put this with not for me. This is following our main character, whose town ends up being cursed, and all the people living in this town were fae, and fae in this world have like an animal side to them, but this curse stopped their animal side from like being prevalent in their bodies, if that makes any sense. The curse also is causing the fae to die a lot sooner than they normally would. So our main character figures out that there's a remedy that she can make with roses that are in this forbidden forest that can kind of prolong people's lives. So one day when she's going into the forest to get these rose petals, she gets taken by the beast and taken to his kingdom that is surrounded by demons. So I did not enjoy the writing of this book. I think that it was very vulgar, unnecessarily so, and I am someone who loves spicy scenes. I mean, I love fantasy romance. I did not like the way the spice scenes in this were written. I like slow angst and buildup, and this just sounded, I don't know, juvenile almost. I was not a fan. However, I did very much like the lore and the story, and I do want to know what happens to the characters, but the writing just wasn't for me. So I think I'm going to read the second book in the series and then pass judgment, but if you want a Beauty and the Beast, very spicy retelling, that does have some very well-timed comedic moments, I would check it out. Personally, I just didn't love it. And then next up, I just finished this book, and it is so good. So it's To Bleed a Crystal Bloom. So this is following a girl that when she was 2 years old, her entire family was massacred, and this stranger who is a high master ends up saving her and takes her back to his tower in isolation, and she kind of grows up just dealing with the fact that like her family was murdered, she's very lonely, and she really wants to connect to this high master. However, he wants nothing to do with her besides taking a drop of her blood every single night. And we're kind of uncovering the world with our main character. This author does not hold your hand. You are really trying to figure things out for yourself. And by the end, I was still very confused, but I very much enjoyed it. So highly recommend. I'm going to put this with great. I cannot wait for the sequel to come out. I think it comes out at the end of 2022. It was really, really good. All right, I'm actually going to move this over. So next up, we have House of Sky and Breath, which is the first book House of Earth and Blood, which is the first book in the Crescent City series. And this book, I'm not going to put in perfection. I think I'm going to put it in great, only because there is so much info thrown at you in the beginning. However, SJM just writes these emotional moments so well. So I was bawling by the end of Crescent City. It just gave me all the feels. Oh my goodness, I love the first book. It is an urban fantasy. Know that going in. I didn't, and I was expecting high fantasy. It is not urban fantasy. Still dealing with fae, and it's really good. I have a full review. I'll leave in the cards in the description. Now, House of Sky and Breath just released, and the longer it's been since I've read it, the more I'm starting to feel like I didn't actually enjoy it as much as I thought. So I can't get into spoilers, but there is a lot going on in the very beginning of this. I did read this book, House of Sky and Breath, in 2 days, but that was only because I wanted to do a review of it. It was very hard to get into, and some of the main characters just made some very interesting decisions that didn't feel, I don't know. I have a lot of issues with this book. The last chapter, however, was absolutely amazing. So I'm actually going to put this in not for me, just because the more I talk about this book to people, I'm realizing that I had a lot of issues with it. I'm still very much looking forward to the third book in the series, though. All right, next up, we have City of Thorns. This is also an urban fantasy series. I buddy read this with Ilsa from Fun Fantasy Books. I am going to put this with not for me. I just feel like there were some, I don't know, pacing issues. The book was very short. I feel like there was, again, unnecessary vulgar language, and the main character, I don't know, there was a lot I just was not a fan of. I think that it was funny at times. We're following this girl that her mother was killed by a demon, and now all she wants to do is get into the demon territory and kill and get revenge on this demon that killed her mother. She ends up teaming up with another higher up demon, and they kind of try to get revenge together, and it's a fantasy romance, so you can kind of figure out what happens. But I didn't love it. I probably will not be rereading or reading the sequel. It just wasn't for me. Next up, we have Black Sunshine by Karina Halley. So this is like spicy, gritty, dark Twilight. Not really. It's a vampire romance, but if you like Twilight, you will enjoy this. It is following this girl that is raised unbeknownst to her by witches, and then one day on her 21st birthday, she is kidnapped by a vampire, and he kind of helps her discover some things about herself. I loved this book. It was so much fun. I'm going to put this in great. I still have to read the second book in the series, but oh my goodness, this was so good. So if you were a fan of Twilight, I would definitely check this book out. All right, next up we have Savage and the Swan by Ella Fields. This is a fantasy romance standalone. It has elements of a lot of different fairy tales. So we have Rumpelstiltskin, the Swan Princess, just Beauty and the Beast. It kind of has a little bit of everything. And the story was interesting enough. So it's following this girl who ends up making an alliance, or it's following this fae girl who ends up making an alliance with a human king in order for them to team up against the leader of the Unseelie Court. The Unseelie Court leader is able to turn into this beast and has just been like terrorizing the humans and the Seelie Court. So it goes from there. I did very much enjoy this. I just feel like it would have benefited from either being the first in a series and like kind of expanding upon the world, because we did have so many different elements, or longer. It's not that long. I just feel like the author tried to cover a lot of things and we didn't really feel as fleshed out as they could have been. But overall, it was still fine. I'm going to put this with okay. I probably won't go back and reread it, but I think I would recommend it to someone who really wanted a good fantasy romance. That's a standalone. There's not a lot of good standalone fantasy romance. All right, next up, we have King of Battle and Blood. This is by Scarlett St. Clair. This is going to be an unpopular opinion. I'm going to put this with not for me. So, I did enjoy this. This is following a girl that ends up being in an arranged marriage to the king of the vampires, and her people kind of want her to assassinate him. Obviously, fantasy romance, they form a relationship. The issue I had with this book is it has so many tropes that we've already seen. It felt very similar to like From Blood and Ash and those type of books, and I kind of guessed like the big twist. Also, I am a fan of like slow burn and books that have a lot of angst and it takes a while for our main love interest to like get together. That doesn't happen with this. There's really no slow burn or angst. So personally, I just feel like it could have been done a little bit better. I will be reading the next one in the series. I did like the story. I just didn't love it as much as a lot of other people that I know that have read it. All right, so next up we have A Court of Honey and Ash. I was very nervous to read this. I thought it was going to be a ripoff of A Court of Thorns and Roses. It was not. It was very enjoyable. We were following this girl that ends up, in the very beginning of the story, she's competing in these trials to become a like soldier, be able to pick her position in the Fae ranks, and when her blood ends up touching the ground, the entire area where all the Fae are staying disappears, and now she's trying to solve this mystery. It was really fun. I've only read the first in the series, but I did enjoy it. It's really between great and okay. I think I'm actually going to put it with okay, but it might get bumped up. All right, next up we have Gilded by Raven Kennedy. This is a very loose King Midas retelling. We are following Orin, who is solid gold, and she is very subservient to Midas. Midas kind of keeps her in his castle on display, and I hated the first half of this book and absolutely loved the second half. I just finished the second book, which I definitely liked more than the first, and I have the feeling this is going to be one of my favorite fantasy romance series. So I'm actually going to put this with great. I did really end up enjoying this. All right, next up is Radiance. So this is probably my favorite Friends to Lovers book. We're following a girl that's in an arranged marriage to this monster, and like right off the back, they are completely repulsed by each other, but their personalities mesh really well. I am going to put this with okay, only because I've read this a while ago and I feel no need to reread it. But it is. It was a very cute story, and if you want Friends to Lovers fantasy romance, I think that one would be excellent for you. All right, next up we have These Hollow Vows by Lexi Ryan. This is I guess it's not really a new release anymore, YA novel, and it has a lot of similarities to ACOTAR. I actually have a video where I do a comparison, but it still feels unique. It's very, very good. I very much enjoyed it. The twist ending, or not the twist ending, the ending was just blew my mind. I really cannot wait to read the second book. I want to know what happens. But we're following this girl whose little sister is taken by the leader of the Unseelie Court. So she travels to the Fae worlds and ends up teaming up with the Fae prince of the Seelie Court and a band of misfits from the Unseelie Court in order to get her sister back. And she has to track down these different relics, and it's really fun. So I am going to put that with great. I very much enjoyed it. All right, next up we have A Promise of Fire by Amanda Boucher. So this is following a woman who's able to discern truth from lies, and then one day someone recognizes her gifts and he ends up magically chaining her to him, and it's kind of like they're traveling. It has the whole Forks proximity trope. Personally, for me, I didn't love the love interest, and I just feel like he never really owned up to what he did in the beginning of the book, so I'm going to put this with not for me. Personally, I just didn't love it. However, a lot of people do really enjoy this fantasy series, so I would still give it a shot. Then we have Savage Lands. This is following a girl that is living in this area that's between the Fae territory and the human worlds. There was a war that broke out between the two sides, and one day she's being trained as a soldier. She goes into the Fae territory. She's kidnapped or captured, and she's put into this Fae prison. And in this Fae prison, it's almost like gladiators have to fight each other, and she ends up getting chosen. And then she goes up against this big, dark, brooding Fae, and it goes from there. I read the first book, very much enjoyed it. I haven't continued with the series, but the first book was really, really good. So I am going to put that also with great. There's a lot of great fantasy romance books. All right, next up we have The Prison Healer, which is kind of like the YA version of Savage Lands. We are following this girl, Kiva, who ends up being taken to this prison known as Zalandov when she is very young. And she keeps getting notes from her parents saying like, stay alive, we're coming for you. And she's just living as a prison medic for most of her life. Until one day, the rebel queen is captured and taken to this prison, and there's a note in the pocket of the rebel queen that says, keep her alive, we're coming from you, and it was written by Kiva's parents. So unfortunately, the rebel queen has just been assigned to these elemental trials that no one has survived, so Kiva ends up taking the rebel queen's place, and it goes from there, and it's very fun. I still have to read the second book, The Gilded Cage. I've had it forever, and I haven't picked it up yet, but I very much enjoyed this. This is also... it's between okay and that's gonna go great. I really like the ending of this book. I did not expect it, so yeah, I'll keep it in great. All right, next up we have Rhapsodic, which is the first book in the Bargainer series by Laura Thalassa. I am not a huge fan of Laura Thalassa's writing. However, I did very much enjoy this first book. This is following a girl that ends up making a pact with the Bargainer, and every time he does her a favor, he puts a bead on her, and then I think she's like in her early 20s. She has like a ton of beads on her wrist. So one day he comes back and he wants to use the favors that she's like collected. And I explained that terribly, but it has a lot of similarities to A Court of Thorns and Roses, except it's much darker. I would check trigger warnings. This one also has like a mystery element to it that I really liked. As the series goes on, I liked the series less and less. I just felt like there was more smut than plot, but the first book was okay. Yeah, I'm gonna put it with okay. I did like the first one, just none of the other ones in that series. And next up is The Bridge Kingdom, and I meant to put the sequel on here too, and I completely forgot. I love this duology. It is following our main character, who is trained to be an assassin, and she was going to marry this person that is in control of this bridge, and whoever owns the bridge pretty much controls all of like the commerce of this area, so you're very well off if you control it. So she is going to marry this guy and then kill him. And a relationship soon forms, and it's so good. I love this series. This is also definitely going to go in great. If I had put the second book, it would also go in great. Just a very enjoyable read. All right, next up we have The Cruel Prince. So if you're familiar with my channel, you know my feelings on this series. I was not a fan of it. I just didn't understand Carden as a love interest, and I despised Queen of Nothing. I thought it was the worst ending to any sort of series. So I'm actually going to put The Cruel Prince with not for me. It is very beloved by a lot of people. I am just not one of them. So if you want fantasy romance, it's very low on the romance. I would still try it out. I didn't love it. All right. Didn't realize the ending of this video was going to be negative. So the next one is Pestilence, which is the first book in the Four Horsemen series by Laura Thalassa. Like I said, I am not a huge fan of Laura Thalassa's writing, and it really stems from this book. So this is following the Four Horsemen, this one being Pestilence. So everywhere he goes, people die of like famine and disease. And he ends up kidnapping this girl and kind of like torturing her in the beginning. And then she falls in love with him. And I just didn't like it. Like, I'm all for like kidnapping and then falling in love. I've read a decent amount of mafia romance books that do it. But I just didn't like the way it was done in this. So that is going to go in nope. But all right, those are all my books and my rankings. Thank you so much for watching. All right, guys, that's it for my tier rank. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know how you would rank these fantasy romance books. Also, if you have any fantasy romance recommendations, let me know down in the comments below. I said this already, but I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday. And if you haven't, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye.